I think every day is a win in the era of COVID. I think we're all helping each other out here remotely, physically, spiritually, and thank you to Jason and Leo for keeping the wheels on this as well in these trying times. I think that for years now, Attorney Action Club and SFLN, we've been sort of operating as little satellites in a tight orbit with one another in a small but powerful legal community in San Francisco. We've been nurturing that for quite a few years now. And just like many stories that we have all heard where people get too focused on making sure the phone call rings from the same one person that you want it to ring from, the sunny days are all the days where everybody's doing well, and the darker days are the days where the seeds that you've planted have shown that the tree has finally grown. And I think with AAC and SFLN, we planted our seeds in the backyard years ago now. And what we're seeing here on a weekly basis, instead of our monthly meetings, we've now kicked it up a notch where every week we're getting together, we're offering free MCLEs, we're reaching out, we're making sure everybody's invited. We don't care what the boundaries are, and we're here to continue to take care of one another for however long this lasts. And we all want it to end quickly, but if it takes half a year, guess what? AAC and SFLN, we're gonna be here, and we're gonna be stronger. We're not here just once a month. We're here once a week, but spiritually, we're here every day. So if anyone out there in the legal community needs our help, let us know, bring in our people, we'll make it happen. If somebody knows of somebody else that's having trouble that needs our assistance, let us also know. We're here for that. We planted those seeds a long time ago. Here we are. We will navigate. We will navigate collectively. And so with that being said, Mr. Stoll, you have the floor.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, Walter. Appreciate that, and well said. And it's great to see everybody here back at 3 o'clock on Thursday as we shelter in place and do what we can to keep moving forward and help others. Today, we are hearing from Leo Manzione, my co-host at Attorney Action Club. And many of you know Leo quite well, I'm sure. I've known him for a long time and worked with his firm. And as Walter said, thinking ahead and planting the seeds for times like this, Leo's firm is really, really good at that. They helped us, it's probably 7, 8 years ago now, get into the cloud without even thinking something like this could occur. So we're running smoothly in the cloud. He helped us diversify our practice. Yeah, big smiles for that, into employment law, so that now our personal injury trials are being continued, but we're able to help people with severance negotiations. And it was all just by, as Walter said, thinking about important work, not always just focusing on the urgent day-to-day stuff, but planning and doing important work that's going to help you in the long run. So I'll turn it over to Leo now to talk about ways to sally forth and continue on in this environment. Thank you, Leo.
Love it. Thank you, Al. Thanks for that great introduction. And Walter, that was beautiful as well. If I ever head into battle, I'm giving you a call. That was inspiring. So a couple notes just before we begin. I'm going to save questions for the end, just because there is so much to cover. We're going to be recording this as usual, so I'm happy to share it. I have somebody from my team here as a panelist as well. So if you send a message to the panelist team, we're just going to take note of that. And if I don't get it to in this presentation, then I'll get back to you as well. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. So first and foremost, we're talking about adapting your practice during COVID-19. We're going to break that statement down piece by piece, but I hope it's all right with all of you if before we get started, I tell you a little bit about who I am first. So in just 60 seconds or less, I am a business coach. I'm one of 2 coaching partners at Run Right Consulting, a firm that some of you may know. I'm recently engaged, something that I was happy to announce at the Attorney Action Club before it happened and then after it happened as well. My background is actually in Italy, where we got engaged. I think it may even be a picture off that same precipice where we got engaged. I'm very happy to do that.
But you had the cat first. Is that what's the problem?
Got the cat first?
Was that a shotgun wedding with the cat or what?
No. Although with these cats, you'd think so. They are unbelievably happy, and I'm so spoiled that we're all just here all the time. Luckily, the door's closed, though, so none of them will be walking across this keyboard. And then I think the most important thing of just me and who I am in this conversation, and I'd say in my work, is just a collector of tools that work. I focus on helping small business owners get everything they need in order to succeed. And that's all about cutting out the trial and error process best I can. There's something that's really key, is that none of you are alone. And not only are you not alone in this crisis, like Walter said, but you're also not alone in building a business. The techniques and methods that you're going to use in order to grow your business from this presentation and in general, they've all been done before in some way, shape, or form. Some of it may feel cutting edge, but the thing is systematically, and I'll show you what I mean, nothing's new under the sun. So that should be really encouraging, because sometimes, and especially times like this, it's easy to feel like we are alone and we're doing this all for the first time, but you're really not. I hope that's great news. So what we're going to talk about today are 4 key things, and each of these breaks out into specific things. We actually have somebody hopping on in order to talk about a specific component of this, but how to get help for specific needs you may have. We're going to talk about working from home, potentially switching to other areas of law practice, how to take the pulse of your practice, because the doctor that doesn't really know what's going on with their patient can't really effectively prescribe and in turn help. In fact, they may be liable just to do more damage than good. So I'm going to make sure that you're not in that situation, that you do really know what's going on. We're going to talk about what it looks like to pivot a practice. In a previous conversation, and one that we're actually doing again with Al and Russ, we talked about what it looks like to pivot and add different parts onto your firm. But what I'm going to talk about here is how you could pivot your practice as a business model. What are the different forms of value that you should consider? And then I'll give you a systematic method, a worksheet, so to say, that you can utilize in order to simplify that process and just attack it bit by bit, bite by bite. And then last is, how can you fix your practice? And that might sound a little dramatic, because some of you here may say like, well, my practice isn't broken. And to that I say, great. But some of you here may have a practice where part of it is broken. And I'm going to show you a system that you can use to fix it. And also it's a tool for those of you whose businesses are doing okay now, or in fact doing great, to make sure that you can fix your business in the future moving forward. So without further ado, just one last reminder, if you have a question, please add it to Q&A so we can get to it. I will not be able to see those as I'm going through the presentation, but let's rock and roll. So we have to lay the foundation in order to go through these concepts, because I'm going to talk about a couple things that if you don't know what they are, it's going to make 0 sense. So business is all about people. That's something that I say often, and it's something that needs to be kept in mind, because I wish, I mean, it's funny. The joke is business is easy until people get involved. But the reality is people also are what make business amazing, make it endlessly complex and interesting and gratifying, is being able to help and serve other people. But that also means that in order to understand how businesses work, we really need to understand how people work. So let's talk about a fun concept here. 7, the idea here is we can really only keep about 7 bits of information in our brain at one time. Take this, for example. This is a number that some of you may recognize, especially in this format. But if I were to ask you to memorize this number, then this format, it's tougher to memorize. The reason we split it up into 3 and 4s, that's one of the ways that our brains operate, not that hard, especially if you've heard the song, 8675309. So as a beautiful example here, if you've heard the song before, you already knew this number. I could say, give me 7 digits, and you might have said it off the top of your head. But thanks to having heard that song, it's something that's familiar to you. Those of you for whom it's not familiar, you need to break it into structure and memorize it in order to make that useful information to you. So let's say I were to give you a number that's 306 digits long. That sounds completely unfathomable. I mean, who can memorize that much, especially in the 30 seconds I'm going to give you to do so? But take a look at the information. There's a pattern there. So the same numbers, the same 7 digits that I gave you earlier, again and again and again. So if you know that, if you know those 7 digits and you know that it repeats, you could repeat this as much as you possibly want. So it's pattern matching. It's recognizing how our brains use information that I'm really going to dig into here. Because like we said, the way that humans process information is equivocally the way that businesses need to process information. And also in many ways, the ways that we are limited are the ways that our business is limited. So let's take it up one more notch to hammer that point absolutely home. What if I were to give you 12,701 digits? Could you memorize that? Because that looks a little bit like this. But take a look at the first 3 digits, and then you'll have a good idea of what this is. Walter, Al, can you tell me what this number is? It's pi. So I doubt anybody in the audience has pi memorized to this number, but the thing is any of you, I could put you on speaker right now, and simply by Googling it, having known that it was pi, you could cite off all these numbers and then many more. I pulled this from a website that had the first couple million digits of pi. So the first 12,000 is nothing. So
By the way, Leo,
yeah.
I answered that question while I was humming Tommy Two-Tone. Is that okay?
That's totally okay.
Okay. Wanted to check in.
I love it. So I want you all to look at these numbers and just let it settle in the gravity of how unbelievably overwhelming it would be to try to memorize this, let alone process it. I'm sure some of you have heard of something called the Fibonacci sequence. We're getting really nerdy here, but it's each digit added to the last digit. Imagine if I asked you to do that with this. It's overwhelming. I mean, it even takes a computer a couple minutes, or probably a couple seconds now, to process those numbers, but our brains aren't separate from that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is work with me to take your business from something that can be this complex when we really look underneath the hood and really simplify it into something that you can not just memorize, but process and act on. Because the key definition here is that data is something like this. Data is just bits of information that haven't been processed yet. But then when you take all that and you properly process it, it becomes something that is useful. So stick to something less than 7. So next up, Gall's law. This is something to keep in mind, and this may also seem complex as well, but I'll break it down really simple to you. And check that URL, by the way, if you'd like to get more information on Gall's law. But Gall's law is the concept that you cannot build something complex from scratch and expect it to work well. So what I'm talking about here is let's say you were to build something really complex, like a car. He talks about that in this example. You try to build a car. There isn't a single human being alive that can take the raw materials, I'm talking the metal, the rubber, everything, and turn it into a working automobile. It's a component of different pieces that work already, that were plugged in bit by bit. And here's the advantage is when your car fails, it's not the car overall failing, it's a part of the car failing. So by replacing that part and diagnosing what's going on, we can swap it out, fix it in, and then that car overall is working. But if you build something really complex from scratch, what tends to happen is the car just doesn't go, doesn't run, and you don't know why, let alone how to fix it. So that's what often causes people to just drop businesses or for businesses to fail entirely. It's because they built something from scratch. They weren't systematic. They weren't scientific about it. Business science is something I talk all the time. Good business science is building something small that works and then incrementally building it, iterating out from there and making sure you have something more complex that works from that, not from just something that you built, scrapped together, and then you just hope it works, but you don't know how to fix it. Does that make sense, Walter?
Got it.
Awesome. Next up, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is something that I think a lot of people have heard of or they understand in theory. It's the inverse of the more you know you don't know, where a lot of people early on in the process, they think they know everything. And we've all been victim to this. It's tempting to think that we're not. But in the beginning, when we're just learning something for the first time, you see that confidence, competence, balance in the beginning. When we're very incompetent, it's easy to gain a lot of confidence and say, you know what, I got this figured out. This is easy. But then as you go further to the right, it slopes off. That's where we drop. And that's where we realize, you know what? I really don't know what I'm doing as well. And that's the process of learning it. And the beauty of this curve is if you go all the way to the right, as competent as you can be, rarely are we ever going to be as confident as we were before. So this really goes to show something that's really important is that I'm not an expert here. And we'll talk about that in a second as we go through this. But I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in something that I'm not, because that's dangerous. And I'll tell you this, and this is one of the reasons I bring this up all the time. The most dangerous people are the people towards the left of this, the people that are barely competent, but they're very confident, and they're very happy to tell you, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. I'm very good here. I've got you. You're covered. But in reality, you're just not so. So one other concept to throw in there. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll explain this to you. And this is a great thing to Google as well, is the concept of a bottleneck. So with bottlenecking, as you can see here, and this is a phenomenon that's going right now with COVID. I won't get into it though. But a bottleneck is what limits the output of a system. You see those beads in the bottle, they're not able to go out any faster than that bottleneck will let them. So the way that you would get more beads out of the bottle is by breaking the glass or making the bottleneck bigger, making that opening bigger so that you then have everything in the bottle come out faster, so it's no longer limited by that bottleneck. So keep this visual in mind when I show you something later. So the concepts, just to review: bottlenecking, the fact that the more you know you don't know, and the inverse is true, the less you know, the more you think you know, and Gall's law, don't build a complex system from scratch. So those are some key things to keep in mind. So now let's jump into a statement. I'm not an expert in everything, so I'm not going to try to explain everything. I'm going to let the experts do that. So as I promised in the promo for this, there are a couple questions that people have. So for example, how do I work from home? How do I network from home? I need help connecting with other attorneys and practicing bankruptcy law. So now we're going to go bit by bit, and there's some people that I recommend that you talk to. So here's the thing. I can give you general things or platitudes or principles to help with this, but I'm not going to waste your time because as I said in that, every moment counts. So what I've done is I've talked to a couple experts that are more than happy to get on the phone with you or make specific recommendations, the first of which being Lucy. So Lucy is somebody that helps people with at-home organizing physically, but she's also designing and collecting things to help people better work from home. If you have any questions about how do I make my home area more useful, how do I be more productive here, who should I talk to in order to do a better job here, give her a call. Go ahead and text her, email her. She is more than happy to spend some time with you to help figure that out. And sometimes when we're done researching something on our own and we just hit a wall, talking to somebody like that is all you need. And she doesn't charge for that conversation. That's just her helping out the way that we all help out each other. Next up, how to continue or start networking from home. Al, you run a BNI chapter. Walter, you're still in BNI, I assume. So BNI is online. And there are 109 groups locally and over 1,000 in this time zone. So if you wanted to join BNI groups and just join this meeting in the mornings, like Al's or Walter's, that's absolutely available to you. So just join it from home the same way you're attending this meeting. I mean, the camera will be on, so make sure you're ready for it. But there are so many opportunities. I would challenge anybody in this meeting to go to even 100 meetings in a couple of months. I've tried it before. It's exhausting. But there's more opportunity to network via Zoom now than ever. And if you've been doing this more than 10 years in Provisors, I mean, there's 200 plus groups that you can do nationwide. So just go ahead and shoot me an email if you have any questions about next steps there. But the simple thing that I want to communicate here is that there are so many opportunities to keep networking right now that frankly, if you're not doing, assuming networking is a good thing for your company to be doing to get new people in the business, marketing, which we'll talk about in a minute, there's nothing stopping you except for you. Next up, helping me grow my firm. So anybody that tells you that the only shop in town are the only people that can help you, they're lying to you and they don't have your best interest in mind. Here's obviously me and my firm. So there's my website, there's what I do, but there are two other business coaches that help attorneys here. There's Elaine Yajnik and there's Elaine Betts. Elaine has some resources on her website specifically for COVID. She specializes on helping attorneys in very stressful situations through those. And Elaine has an amazing program that he's designing when it comes to sales and selling. So these are two other people that I recommend checking out. I mean, if you're looking for help with growing your firm, obviously you want to do your homework and do your due diligence to make sure that you find the right fit. Of course, I'm biased and I hope to be the fit to the extent that I have capacity, but make sure that you look into what's available. Because again, you're not alone. If you're looking to grow your firm, if you're looking to take it to the next level, there's so many resources out there to help. You're not figuring it out on your own. Trial and error is a slow way to get there. So what I really recommend is that you get help in one way, shape, or form in order to do that. And there's no shame in that, because find somebody who has a big business, a multi-million-dollar business, like the firm that's hosting this. I mean, Walter and Al, and a lot of help get them there. And it was the courage to get that and the humility to ask those tough questions that helped them get to where they are. So next up, and this is somebody actually that I'd like to add on. I'm going to stop the share to take her on as a panelist. We have somebody here, Jen Lee, who I would like to give the floor to just talk about what it means to transition that type of law, and then also what she's doing to help support attorneys. So Jen, I've unmuted you. Let me know if you'd like me to turn on the camera as well. Should I?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
I think so. I've got enough cameras today. Well, thank you for having me, Leo.
Of course.
So,
yeah, tell us a little
ahead.
more about what you're doing.
So I am a bankruptcy attorney. I call it debt and credit attorney, but I've had a lot of attorneys reach out to me in the last couple of weeks to ask about how they can start their own bankruptcy practice because they see it as a booming area. So I have launched a couple of different ways to help attorneys who want to learn bankruptcy. I have a bankruptcy in a box type solution that's an on-demand course, and I can link that, I guess, in the chat if people want to see that. And then I also do one-to-one consulting on implementation of systems and how to efficiently make a bankruptcy practice profitable, because bankruptcy can be one of those ones where you don't make a profit sometimes. So that's what I'm doing these days.
Sorry. And you have an event on Fridays that you're doing as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so on Friday, I have a group called Lawyer Success Network. It's on Facebook, and it's similar to this. It's just masterminding and trying to keep attorneys moving forward in the profession. But tomorrow we are having Roberta Guys come and do a presentation at 10 a.m. on reputation and brand management and how to do a brand audit on your law firm. So that's tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
That's awesome. And just one of the reasons that I'm so glad that Jen can be here is that you were really early in that. I remember seeing that email and people being able to join quite quickly. So thank you for being there early, and thanks for continuing to see that through. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So we'll hop back to the slides. I saw a couple questions in chat, so just remember to keep adding those to Q&A as you can. So there's Jen Lee's contact information. As always, if you have any questions, let us know. We're more than happy to connect you. So I have a question for the audience, essentially. I mean, can you practice law right now? Because some of you can, some of you have adapted, some of you can't. But that's the big question that we're going to act on here. And here's the way that I want you to think of it. There are two negative answers to that question, assuming that you can't. One, is it your practice overall, or is it a part of your practice? Because sometimes people say, like, you know, I just can't do what I do right now. There are a lot of business models right now that just aren't possible because face-to-face wasn't the same way that it used to be. But I'm going to challenge that assumption. And we're going to actually go through a couple specific exercises to see, is it part of the business or is it the business overall? And the reason, Jen mentioned that there are ways that you could pivot even your practice right now to practice bankruptcy law. So that's something that's available to people right now. If you're like, you know what, I can't even practice right now, I am frozen, that's an option. And there are many others, which I'll help you consider systematically as well. So let's jump right into that. There's a concept which I've talked about many, many times ad nauseum, but as I was just talking to somebody earlier on their show before this, you can't say it enough, because when you have something that's really helpful to people, you really can't shut up about it. So I'm never going to shut up about this. So the 5 parts of every business are a really key way to look at any business. And I don't care if it's a law practice, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or a lemonade stand. I actually just used that as an example recently. The 5 parts of every business exist, and they have to be paid attention to, and they can be a platform upon which we can build a bigger, better, more powerful business. So let's start going through those. So I'm going to list them quickly, and then I'll go through them one by one. So create value, market value, sell value, deliver value, and then you support the business overall. So those are the 5 parts. There's a link that just went out that talks about those 5 parts as value creation, marketing, sales, value delivery, and finance. I recommend checking that out to go in a little bit more depth. But what I'm going to share with you now are the key questions that I ask for each of the 5 parts. And this is a diagnosis. I mean, you can reuse this video later on to re-diagnose your business, because like we talked about with the bottleneck, as soon as you fix one bottleneck, you got another one. And that's the beautiful part of growing a business that we'll always get to deal with. It's our lot, is we are always finding and fixing bottlenecks. That's what growing a business is. So these questions, we're going to go through all 5 parts. We're going to help you figure out, is this where your business is bottlenecked? If it is, I'm going to give you some techniques that you can use right here and now. They're small. There's more. Let me know if you want more. There's a lot of free materials, for example, that I'm giving away on YouTube to help people fix these problems on their own. But first, you got to know where it hurts. So questions under create value. Is what you're selling profitable? And this is something I can't tell you enough times. I mean, I remember when I first started consulting in the Southeast, there were businesses that I would sit down with where if you looked at their offerings, they assumed, okay, this package, this portfolio that we have out in the market is profitable. But when you actually look at it piece by piece, there were parts of it upon which they were either not making much money or I kid you not, sometimes losing money. I mean, there's a specific company in the Southeast who was doing speaker repair and auto detailing. And I showed him that the auto detailing that he was doing was losing him money. Every single time the transaction happened, he lost money. And as a practitioner of law, as an attorney, you may see the same thing. You may see that there are certain cases where you are spending so much time on it that it really doesn't pay out much. And here's the beauty of it, and it's kind of an elegant, just real beauty. You always have to look at the opportunity cost of it. If you're spending 30 hours on something that nets you $2,000, when there's something else that you could have spent 2 hours on that nets you more than that, that's something you need to take a look at. And the rest of these 4 parts are going to show you how you can build a business around that. But this may seem like such an obvious question, but always keep asking yourself, are the things that your business is selling profitable? If so, how much? And then the context question here is it the best use of your expertise? As attorneys, there's a tremendous amount of things that you can do to help people. Sometimes we get pigeonholed. Sometimes we just have this paradigm that we can only practice or do business in a certain specific way. But as we talked about in our last presentation, I mean, Al and Walter are a great example with their firm. There are different types of law that you can add to your firm, either thanks to adding somebody like you did, or having a new skill set be brought into the forefront like Russell. So practicing a new kind of law. So make sure you're asking yourself these two questions. So if your answer to either of these is really negative, for example, it's not profitable or it's not very profitable or it's not the best use of your expertise, you may be bottlenecked in value creation. Next up, marketing value is all about getting the attention of your target market. So do you know who your ideal client is? I mean, some people, especially in times like this, they just take on all the business that comes their way. And they just say, you know what, I just need to make ends meet. But that often leads to a problem with that first part, where if we take everything that comes our way, sometimes it's not profitable. Sometimes it's not a good thing for us to be doing within our company, and the opportunity cost will come around to haunt us. So you need to know who your ideal client is. And then two, do you have a flooded pipeline of those potential ideal clients? To some of you in the audience, that may seem like, oh, that would be nice. It'd be nice to have as many potential ideal clients as I could. But for some of you, you're in that position. And then it becomes a matter of how do I get more specific on who my ideal client is so that I really fill my capacity properly. And we'll talk about capacity in a minute. But this is something you need to be working towards. And this may sound so hokey, but if you don't believe it's possible to have a flooded pipeline of potential ideal clients, if you don't think it's possible, you're probably going to end up proving yourself right. But instead, if you really recognize that it's not only possible, but a normal part of a thriving, healthy, successful business, then it's something you're going to start implementing tools like some of them that we'll talk about here in order to make that a reality. Next up, you have to sell that value. And when I say sales, it often feels like an icky word, like, oh, salesman, car salesman, pushy. Real sales, good sales is all about making sure that you understand what your target market wants and is willing to pay for, and then finding them that. One of the reasons earlier I mentioned other people that do what I do is I know that I and my firm am not the right fit for everybody. So what's a priority to me in the complimentary sessions I do with business owners is figuring out, do they need business coaching? If they don't, I get them what they need. If they do need business coaching, am I even the right fit? So that's something that's really key for you to know within your own business is, are you first and foremost getting a clear understanding of what it is that your target market wants and is willing to pay for? Because I'll be blunt, anybody, like I said earlier, that says that they're the only fit, they don't really have your interest in mind. Make sure that you're also acting properly when you're on the other side of that equation. You're really understanding what it is that they need and then making it easy for them to buy. And that's the question here. You're making it easy for people to buy. Take a step, and that's something I'll talk about in a second. Take a step and go through those step-by-step processes that people do in order to work with you and realize, am I making this more difficult than it needs to? Do I have more contracts than I need to? Now, granted, of course, contracts are important. I know my audience, but you also have to make sure that you're not overcomplicating the process. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then next, and this, I simplified this question because a lot of people are starting from scratch here, of do you have a sales checklist? You don't really need a script. You don't need something that's word for word telling people, okay, this is how it is every single time. It's maybe just 3 to 5 steps that you go through with everybody that comes through your pipeline to make sure that you're consistent and that you're helping everybody properly make the right decision. Because if you're omitting a key piece of information with some of the people you're working with as a potential client, you're doing them a disservice. If they didn't know that you did this specific kind of work, or they didn't know that they could work with you in that other way, or they could pay this way instead of that way, then you're not really helping them buy in the best possible way. So we'll talk about more of that in a second. So those are the key sales questions. Next, delivering value. Is your delivery process consistent? I'm not going to go too deep into this, but just imagine if your favorite businesses became inconsistent. In fact, we often have examples of that top of mind. It's one of the things that people hate the most, besides the obvious, is when they show up and it's just not the same that it was last time. It's unbelievably frustrating. As human beings, we have enough uncertainty in our lives, especially at this point in time. So making sure that people show up and get the same thing from you each time is key. And I'll go ahead and answer what's commonly a question here, a challenge is, it's better to be consistently good than occasionally great. And here's the challenge with that is if you're occasionally great for somebody and then you're only good after that, it's by contrast disappointing. And that's really frustrating for people is, man, I worked with them and they were amazing that one time. And then I referred somebody over, or I worked with them again and it just wasn't the same experience, even though you're still good. By contrast, it's disappointing. So I would argue, and this is something I have a lot of experience in helping businesses do, it's better to be really consistent at a level than slowly raise that bar over time instead of just focusing on the occasional greatness. So then the other question here, and I mentioned this earlier, is you have to know what your capacity is. And I ask people this all the time is, for example, if we were to wave a magic wand and suddenly you're doing 10 times as much business as you are right now, is that sustainable? Is that something that you can do consistently? And if not, that's something we need to fix. Because I'll tell you this, and this goes back to sales, and this is more in depth than we need to get here, but I'll share it because it's valuable. People often say, you know what, I'm bottlenecked with marketing, I'm bottlenecked with sales, I just need more clients. But in reality, they're bottlenecked in value delivery. Because if they knew deep down, and we're going to go through this in an exercise later, that they could deliver no matter what, then they would sell like crazy. They would go out there, they'd get in front of everybody, they'd scream it from the rooftops, but they're not doing it because deep down, and sometimes this is subconscious, they're really afraid of actually getting new business, which seems insane. It seems crazy. Why would you be scared of new business? But they're scared of getting new business and having that quality of what they deliver drop. And they're afraid of the reputation failing. So make sure that you've actually double checked it. That's why the all 5 parts are so critical. They work in tandem. Make sure that you know your capacity and you honor that capacity as well. Last question here, and this goes to the sustainability, I guess, last group of questions. Is your day-to-day sustainable? And it's not just your day-to-day, but the business's day-to-day. And especially in times of crisis, it's easy to get into a position that's unsustainable. When we talk about occasionally great, sometimes in times like this, it's more like our consistency has dropped. And if we just do business as normal, it's bad or not even possible. And then occasionally we can do business. But you want to make sure that you have a bar, something that's consistent, something that you can deliver. And then the last question here is, are you earning enough to support yourself? That's a tough question that a lot of people are asking themselves right now. And some of them have to pivot, which we're going to talk about ways to pivot here and now. But it's something that it's better to ask this question sooner rather than later. And sometimes it's just a matter of tweaking something within your business. And again, we'll get to that. But sometimes it's something that we need to figure out when we need to look at other options, maybe temporarily. I did a great interview with Doug Bend recently talking about the different structures of business. But the key thing is that sometimes a company just needs to have us go do something else to provide for our family, make ends meet. And there's no shame in that. The only shame in that, and I'm not applying shame here, but if there were shame, it would be from being too proud to ask that question of, is this enough to support myself and my needs, my families? Because we have to adapt. That's the name of the game here. Every moment counts. So I'm going to go through questions for each of these. So hopefully you have an idea of where your business is bottlenecked in those 5. If you need help with that, don't hesitate to reach out. I could either recommend stuff or have a conversation with you. But here are the questions for each of these and essentially the action items for each as well. So if it's for value creation, if you're struggling really to have something that your target market wants and is willing to pay for that's profitable, don't try to reinvent the wheel. I mean, and this is something that a lot of people overcomplicate. They try and create something that's unique. And some of you may be saying, based on what I said earlier, I am the only gig in town. I'm the only person that does this. There's nobody else that does what I do. And to that I say, that's great, but consider that your customers, if they don't work with you, are still going somewhere else to get their needs met. You are not serving every single person in the market that needs you. There's some people that aren't working with you. You need to figure out where they're going. So especially if you're starting a new business or you're pivoting to something new, consider the fact that if competition is there, either direct or indirect, direct being somebody that does what you do, indirect being something else that kind of solves it, maybe a product, something that isn't direct competition, that's a good thing, because then you can look at that and figure out how to do it better. And the comment I want to make here is when I say better, it often means a better calibration. So just because you're doing something quote unquote better than somebody else doesn't mean that they're bad, doesn't mean that they're fundamentally worse. It may just mean that you have a better sense of a specific part of the market and how you could serve them better. How you could serve them in a way that nobody else is. And then, and here's kind of flipping it on its head, then you really become somebody that doesn't have a competition. You're somebody that is the best fit for them. So hopefully that makes sense. Next up, value or marketing value. So if your problem's here, it begs that first thing of you need to understand who your ideal client really is. And then you want to understand where else are they? Networking is such an important thing. If you're wondering, why should I network? Why should I go to BNI Provisors? Why should I get out there? It's because your ideal client isn't only working with you. In some way, shape, or form, they're also working with other people, either in the same avenue of the same kind of pain points, problems that they're having, or other people that just know them as well, and there's a corollary. So you need to know who else could send you these clients. For example, we talked about Lucy earlier. Lucy helps people make sure that they're really as organized and productive in their home as they possibly can be. She did a co-presentation with somebody else who she can introduce you to that specializes in people's more digital systems. They're more way of processing information. They share a lot of clients. And that's something where by them understanding how each other work and how they could network together, Together, they're so much better. So 1 + 1 is more than 2 in that situation. So here's the point, is if you can clearly communicate who your ideal client is and who sends you that person, that alone is enough. Assuming you can clearly communicate it and you're right and that you can deliver it, that means you just need to go out and network. You just need to tell people about that. So that's why I said in the bottom, assuming that you've also done part 1, that you actually can create value in a way that's profitable. Because keep in mind, all these parts are interdependent, meaning they all rely on each other. They can't work in isolation. I'll show you what that looks like if that happens. But if you try to market and sell something that isn't the right thing for your business to be sold, that's just speeding up the process of your business closing. So make sure that these all work together. And as you grow your business, you will, believe it or not, you will be dealing with all 5 of these, sometimes in quick succession. Next up, selling value. So this part's pretty straightforward. I want you to go through that process, like I alluded to, that your clients go through. And by the way, if you guys are writing furiously, I'll send you these slides. Don't worry. I probably should have said that earlier. I apologize for that. But go through the process of what your customers do in order to purchase from you. And you need to make that systematic. Make it step by step. And actually, this is a great exercise to do with somebody you know and love. Have them pretend to be a customer and go through it step by step. Literally sign the documents, go through it bit by bit to make sure that, like we said, sales is all about, just like delivery, consistency. You want people to go through the same experience, hear the same things, because if it works, you want to do that same process again and again with the same people, same kinds of people. And then, like I said, from contact to contract, you want to have it standardized. You want to have a checklist. It doesn't need to be a script. It can just be a checklist of how you're going through that process bit by bit. Delivering value. So do the same process you did through sales, step back into those potential customer shoes and go through the delivery process. What are the steps? You need to know how somebody else could deliver the work that you do. I know that seems crazy, especially if you're an attorney where you're like, I'm the expert here. I'm the only person that can do this work. You still need to be able to explain it, because as we'll go through in an exercise later, you may be in a situation, sometimes for a very good reason. Like we say, sometimes we joke about, oh, if so-and-so in your business got hit by a car, that's negative. We'd like to switch it towards, okay, well, if they won the lottery, then they're going to go do something else. So if you won the lottery and found somebody just like you that can do the same work, then that could allow you to double your capacity. So you need to have your process systematized and standardized so that they can pick it up and quite quickly deliver work in a similar way that you can, because then you could sell their services similar to the way that you sell your own. So create a checklist for that. And like we said earlier, like with a car, nobody builds a car from scratch. They use proven pieces. Do the same thing as you build this process. Find other things that work for other people. I mean, no reason to create your own CRM. Use one. There's so many good ones out there. No reason to build your own website from scratch unless you're into that. But there's so many other platforms or experts that can create it for you so much faster and better, unless, again, that's what you do. So last, supporting the business. You want to look closely at your life and business and finances and figure out why. If it's not sustainable, if you're not earning enough, you need to pause, take an evening, maybe a weekend, and figure out what's really going on. Because what's most dangerous within a business, and I alluded to it, I've done videos on this, it's called bad science, is when somebody just makes an assumption. And they just say, you know what, like this is the way that it is. And that's life. That's my business. And I'm going to act like that's just a permanent rock in there. And it's a rock against a hard place if I try and fight it. There are certain assumptions that we make. And like I promised, we're going to go through an exercise about this in a minute. There are assumptions that we make as business owners that change or that we're wrong about. And that in many ways is what's most dangerous to a business owner. So be willing to take the core assumptions that you've built your business on, that you operate on day to day, and challenge those. And I'm going to give you a way to do that. So then there are just a couple questions here at the end that I want you to be asking yourself is, what skills am I missing here? Like we talked about, it takes humility to say, okay, how can I be better? How can I have somebody else help me? What do I need that is lacking? What does my business really need that is lacking? And that's something that you should, and I hope for each and every one of you, that you have the privilege of being in a situation where you can say, you know what? I don't need to figure this out on my own. I'm going to have somebody else, some experts step in here and provide something that's really going to save me time, money, and then just make my business better. That's a privilege. That's an opportunity that you work towards, because in the beginning, we often have way more time than money. And then later on, we have more money than time, and we essentially buy back that time to spend with loved ones and on things that are important to us. So don't be afraid to ask for help. So let's talk about pivoting your law practice. I'm going to explain something. Go ahead, Walter.
Definition of a CRM?
Customer relationship management tool. So for example, I teach something called a pipeline, where you want to know the key stages that your customers go through. So for example, first stage is somebody that you're interested in or they're interested in you, called a lead. You want to know which of the people in your system, in your contact book, are leads, which are prospects. Prospects are people where you kind of started a conversation, there is some interest there. And then after that, who's in what step of the process as you're turning them or helping them become potential customers. It's very helpful if you have something that tracks where people are in that process, instead of needing to go through your email or go through your phone book or text messages to figure out, okay, who's where. And when you have a CRM, even a very, very basic one, if you want a free basic one, I'm happy to give it to you. It saves you so much time, because every day you can just start with saying, okay, here's who I need to talk to about what. And it leaves your customer waiting for less time as well. So you don't have that bottleneck. Thank you for reiterating that question, Walter.
Thank you.
I assume that's when they came up.
Jeff Pink.
Perfect. So let's talk about how you can pivot your law practice. I'm going to talk about tools and ways that you can look at your business and how tools that you use to provide value. So most people just think of their business as one of two things. So a product or a service. But I'm here to tell you and show you that there are 10 other forms of value. But I'm going to go through each of these one by one. And the reason I say this, and I'll be really clear, many of these won't apply to you. And that's okay. But this is an exercise. This is an exercise for you to consider each and think of, okay, how could I adjust my business? How could I adjust the way that I provide value? And I could give examples for each of these, of how attorneys specifically have utilized each of these 12 in order to create a business that could adapt or provide value in a different way. And there's a link going out soon just on these if you want to do more research into it. So first, product is really just a physical thing, sometimes digital, that somebody pays for a set amount and then receives. Next up, service is essentially exchanging time for money. That's many of you are in the service business. We're exchanging time for money. And as many of you have already felt or will feel, there's a ceiling that you reach where there's only so much time that you can sell. And then you come a point where you either need to get more time, so somebody else's time, or hand off parts of the process so it takes you less time in order to deliver it. But to consider one or the other of these 12 forms of value is a really great thing to consider as you're reaching that ceiling, or ideally in prevention of it, sometimes even years of advance. So shared resource. This is another form of value that people often don't consider, but that's when you have a business model like a gym, where it's all these machines in one place that people come together and they can access. And it's a key way to provide something that then is more leveraged. So for example, a shared resource for an attorney might be a library of documents. I mean, there are a lot of businesses like that online. I mean, I think LegalZoom's practice is this. I'm sorry to mention that name. But there are businesses on there where they've created something that then people have access to and then they utilize. And instead of buying all that gym machinery, all that equipment together at once, each person individually, they just have a small segment of it. Next up, subscription. This is often how gyms monetize their business. It's something where somebody's paying regularly in order to have access to something. Maybe it's access to a person. Maybe it's access to a shared resource. And the thing that I want to say really clearly, these 12 are not mutually exclusive. I would argue that almost every single one of your businesses has more than just one. You may consider, I'm a service business. That's who I am. That's all I am. You'll see that some of these actually kind of apply to your business as well. For example, a subscription. I mean, if you have your clients paying you a certain amount every month in order to have access to you, that's a subscription. It's also an option, which we'll talk about in a minute. Resale. That's when you're not creating the thing that your business makes money off of, but you're taking something that somebody else created and you're reselling it to a certain audience. We're going to talk about audience aggregation soon, which is getting attention of just a specific audience. Resale is often the way that people monetize that, where they say, you know what, I have a forum online of people that are really, really big fans of blah, blah, blah. And then they're looking to buy so-and-so, but they didn't have access to that. And now that I've connected the two, I can do that. This is sometimes negatively called the middleman, but as people, each and every single one of you has purchased something via resale, for example, via Amazon, this is a very, very viable business model if you can make it work. Lease. Lease is you don't own it, but you're simply paying to have access to it. Agency. That's where you're really understanding, okay, I'm not transacting here, but I'm helping make this conversation happen. I'm starting to glaze through these to make sure that we get on time. Check the link if you want more details on these. Audience aggregation, getting the attention of a specific audience and then either selling access to that in the form of advertising or incorporating one of the other business models here as well. Loan is pretty obvious. You have financial resources or maybe even some other kind of resources that you're giving somebody and you're getting interest in one way, shape, or form. Option, like we said earlier, that's like a movie ticket. You pay to have the option of showing up to that movie in the movie theater at that time. We try to use those, but often we pay for options that we don't need, like insurance. Insurance is a slightly different kind of option, but you're paying And then only when something specific happens, then do you get the value of what's being delivered here. Capital, that's like investing in a business. Many business attorneys, I don't want to say many, but some business attorneys in the long run, what they do is then they find opportunities to invest in businesses. Obviously, they do it the right way. You don't want to lose your license there to practice law, but capital is another thing to consider. Sometimes people just need certain resources in order to do certain kinds of business. So those are the 12. So check that link if you want more details on the 12. What we're about to do is we're going to go through the concrete exercises bit by bit to not only pivot your firm and understand how can you do different kinds of business, like bankruptcy law, for example, or how can I fix a specific part of my firm? So let's get systematic. It's a good chance, by the way. I see some questions. Great points. Awesome. Okay, so here we go. So those of you that are at a computer, you're not listening, there's a link going out in a minute where we're going to talk about, you can actually access this document as I go through it, but I'm also going to share my screen so that you then have access to it. So this is Excel for those of you that are new to this. This is a fun tool that some of you might not consider fun in any way, shape, or form. But what I've done here is I first want to show you a bottleneck visually. So imagine we're going through your business bit by bit, and we're figuring out where your strengths and weaknesses. So for example, you might be on a scale of 0 to 5, a 3 on creation, a 1 on marketing, 2 on selling, delivering, and supporting your business. So the thing I want you to look at here, I know it might be a lot to take in at once, is you have 5 people out there in the ether that want to work with you, but because your business is bottlenecked in marketing, you're only getting the attention of 1. So it doesn't matter if you can create a heck of a lot of value, or you could sell more than you're selling now, or deliver more. All you have coming through there is 1. That's where the bottleneck is. So the reason I included this in the document, and just so you know, you can go to File, make a copy if you want to mess around with this on your own, is it shows you something really key. You could get even better at creating value. Let's say you take this one all the way up to a 5. All it does is just increased waste. All it does is just your business is now heavily invested in something that's not paying off anymore. The way that you fix this bottleneck is by focusing on the bottleneck and getting better at marketing. And then you see it's more calibrated here. But let's say that you were to increase all of these to 3, which is the right way to grow a business. Not 33, sorry. Which we'll talk about in a second. But going beyond a bottleneck, because now it's here, and let's say, okay, let's just focus on marketing all the way, still just increases waste. So the ideal way to grow a business is sequentially. Make sure that it's calibrated properly and you know where you're strong, where you're weak, and then you keep that up. So I hope that makes sense. So feel free to mess around with this. It's a little fun. I always love showing people bottlenecks visually because it's easy to talk about it, but it's really tough to see it in practice in the real world. Next up, what I want you to do is look at your business. This is fixing part of your practice. Take your business and take the critical steps. As I'm describing this to you, by the way, resist the temptation to look ahead or look at other things. It's just going to get confusing. You can always go back to the recording if you want help going through this. But look at the key steps of your business bit by bit. So for example, I'm actually using Al's firm, and the example that he said earlier, Alan Walter's firm, of going to the cloud is, if you look at your business or your practice here, you need to speak with clients. You need to be able to receive key documents, store them, and access them. Earlier, and I know lawyers that do this, and it's fine when it's available, they kept all the documents at their office and they met everybody at their office, and that's fine. That's great. But right now, that's just not possible. So what I want you to do, and this is step 2. So step 1, look at the key parts, the critical steps of your business. Step 2 is to go here, and I gave you 24 different alternatives if you want to add them, if you want to get real nerdy with it. Look at different things that could change in your business. So for example, here you have office access. Later on, you no longer have office access. So as Alan Walter did, they're in the cloud because they have something that they could practice law with just internet access. They're in the cloud. They didn't miss a beat when they could no longer access the office. That was great. That was pre-adaptation. That's very, very helpful. Later on, I want you to consider things like, okay, what if, and heaven forbid, you don't have internet access? What if you only had phone access? How would you do this? I mean, these are blank because I don't have a clear answer, but I can help you figure it out of how would you practice law? How would you access these documents if you don't have access to the office or internet? But this is where you do a little bit of stress testing. Because here's the thing is when you really challenge your business model in ways like this systematically, remember, don't try to do all the digits of pi at once. Break it down step by step. Critical steps, critical components, and alternatives. You're going to make your business more resilient. And you're going to be able to handle things better and faster because it's not a matter of if, something happens that throws your business out of whack, it's a matter of when. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. So next up with pivoting your firm, and we're going to end on this, is I want you to take a look at what's important to you for your business. And these are what I call the requirements. Again, I made space for a ton of requirements if you want to get really specific on it. But I want you to think of things. For example, first one, which is most obvious, is that you need to make enough money. Feel free to change this however you want as you make a copy. Next up is, do you have the skills to actually deliver this? And then you can create more, but step one, like I said, is make those requirements for you. And then two, just think of different opportunities. For example, doing government work. Let's go ahead and do that. So that's something that it may be enough money and you may have the skills, in which case I had this here, what automatically tells you this is a viable business model. This is a tool I've used many times. Next up, if you're not sure, then it'll tell you need to research it. If you don't have the skills, like for example, let's say practice bankruptcy law, and I'm just being short here, it's bankruptcy, not bank law. Some of you aren't attorneys, so that's simply not viable. So that's something where you need to go through these things one by one. And what you're going to see are different ways that your business could practice. Pull up that list, the 12 different forms of value. Get creative, get somebody else involved, and think of all the different ways that you could practice. Just to give you a couple quick ideas, there are some attorneys, some of which are actually in the room here, that instead of practicing law specifically, they focused on tools that other attorneys can utilize in order to practice law better. That's a product, that's a subscription, that can be a shared resource, audience aggregation. That's something that many attorneys never consider because they say, I need to practice law, that's all I need to do. You may be able to provide way more value in a different way, especially in times like this. So this is just the time to consider other things, and at the very least, have them on deck. Because like I said, it's not a matter of if something changes, it's really just a matter of when. So these two exercises can not only be used to fix a firm that's really struggling, that has part of it that's broken, or one that's entirely just not possible right now. Your firm may be in a place where you just can't practice right now. Maybe one of these things is having access to my office and it's a no. So that means your business is not viable. But this is a way, like I said, to simplify the thought process, look at it step by step, and then go from there. And with this helpful information, you can then make better decisions instead of doing, like I've said, time and time again, just making assumptions that your business may crumble underneath with those on the foundation. So with that said, I wonder if we have a couple times, a little bit of time in order to answer questions. Well, Al, do we?
Yeah, we have some questions, sure.
Awesome.
You can answer, yeah.
So I have not been checking the chat. If there are any questions that pop up, I know Walter asked some. Thank you for doing that. Otherwise, let's let people raise their hands, and then we can either allow you to talk or just add it in. I see Q&A. Will there be MCLE credit for this great webinar? Thank you, Scott. Al, do you mind answering that one for us?
Yes, there will be CLE. Maya is on the webinar, and we'll send that out to everybody who registered.
Awesome. All right, more questions. I know that was a, yes, Walter?
If we could just save 30 seconds for James Creech if he responds to the email I sent him. He's doing the presentation next week, and I thought we'd try to give him the floor for about 30 seconds or less.
I think that's wonderful.
James, you out there, buddy? Come on.
Did we let James speak? Or is he here?
I see him there. I'm allowing him to talk.
Okay.
He's in here. Just need to allow him if he's available.
All right, James, if you want to mute yourself, you can talk. If anybody has any questions, just raise your hand.
Do I need to? Oh, he's muted. Let me help.
James, you're muted.
Yeah, I'll unmute him. There we go.
Caught him sleeping, I think.
All right. Hey, Leo, while we're waiting for James to unmute, you helped our law firm, and you mentioned a few times, figure out if you're making any money at all. And you taught me, and Crystal taught me, that that's called profit margin, I think. Mm-hmm. And we worked really hard on that. It took us a long, long time. We're contingency fee lawyers. Can you offer the audience some help in terms of what's the best way to start going down that path to figure out? I mean, none of us have MBAs. If you're making money or not.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So simply put, you want to break your business down into those two key parts, which give you the third. So you want to know your revenue, you want to know your expenses, and then to calculate those, revenue minus expenses equals your profit. this is something that you definitely want to do in aggregate with your business. You want to understand all the money coming in, all the money going out, and then your profit margin. One of the things that then gets tricky as well is also looking at your business by separate, like I said, services. So for example, maybe certain practices of law within your firm. Is that earning money? So you also want to be able to know, can you tie certain expenses to certain activities? So for example, people are often asking like, hey, is BNI worth it? Is Provisors worth it? I'm spending all this money. So you want to be able to crunch the numbers on how much money are you spending on that? How much new business are you getting out? And then I'll add a kicker there as well. It's a little more complicated, but something people need to think about. You also want to jump on these calculations for your time, because sometimes we're spending a lot of time on something that it's creating money, but until we actually track how much time is going into it, we don't realize that, this is a lower ROI activity. In fact, we may be losing money because we could be spending that time elsewhere. I know it was a long answer, Al, but I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, no, and we have a lot of different types of cases. Some cases settle as claims, some as a full-blown lawsuit. And the work we did with you was just instrumental in terms of figuring out where we were making money and where we were losing quite a bit of money. It was very instructive. I thank you for that. Yeah,
I recommend if anybody wants to do some homework on this on their own, Google a concept called cost centers and profit centers. There are certain parts of the business that generate money. There are some that don't. And there's a whole methodology to that you want to keep in mind. But that's just something if you want to do some homework on your own, I'll type that in. Dean has a question here I'd like to answer. He says, can you speak to scaling a business? Just your general ideas. Absolutely. The infographic that I shared earlier, the 5 parts of the business, I can actually bring this up again here. A business that hasn't prepared to really be stress tested. So for example, you see this business here. What happens often when businesses are struggling to scale, let's say they've got great value creation, they've got good marketing, but they aren't ready to close all these people, or they're not ready to deliver them, and the business really isn't ready to support itself. This is what a business looks like when it's scaling and it's not ready to scale, which is just terrifying, because the worst situation, if you really care about your market, which I assume you all do, is being in a situation where you have the ability to help them incompletely. So let's say you have all these people that come to you saying, hey, I need your help. Like some people, their phone may be just blowing off the hook, just like, hey, I need you. But they don't have the means to actually create a profitable transaction to work together thereafter, or let alone deliver the services necessary in order to satisfy these people. So this is what it looks like if you don't scale properly. And the way that you do scale properly is making sure that your business, and this is something you don't overdo it, because a lot of people, what they do here is they overbuild a business. They overbuild a business in the latter parts. So they have a business, they have a sales team that's ready to handle everybody. They have a whole delivery system in order to make sure that they could scale up and deliver to millions of people. I mean, strangely enough, if you create an online product, you could do it in the next 15 minutes, selling it for $2. That's great. You could probably have 1 million people purchase that. Oops, I keep editing the wrong thing. Don't do that, folks. But nobody knows about your business. So again, make sure that you understand and can explain your business in these 5 parts, and that you grow the business in tandem, and that you grow it bit by bit. You don't overgrow it, but that you understand, okay, how many people can we work with? You know your capacity here. You also know how many people could you get their attention of? How many people can you talk to regularly? How can you make sure that you're consistently selling to those amount of people? How can you make sure that you can actually create value to deliver those people? How do you make sure that you don't have too many people on staff than you need, but you also have access to new people on staff? And I'll be really blunt here. Scalable means you have a business that can deliver to more people without having to add more people to the equation, essentially. Ideally, it's technologically scalable. And then you want to make sure the business has a lot of support. So I could go about this ad nauseum, and just FYI, I didn't mention this earlier, but these 5 parts are really in depth. There's a book that I linked. I taught an entire course just on those 5 parts. It took an entire semester. So as you can tell, there's a lot of information here, but I hope that helped, Dean. Dean asked another one saying, can you speak to service businesses scaling? And that goes to what I was saying earlier, is a service business where you're exchanging time for money, you are going to hit a ceiling. So yes, you can leverage yourself, or make it, for example, instead of working with one-on-one person at a time, it's one to a group. So there's some people where, for example, they create a class, a Zoom meeting like this, where they're working with multiple people at once. That's something that can help leverage you, but going to the core definition of scaling, again, you're always going to hit a ceiling there. So what I recommend that you think of as you go through that exercise of ways that your business could pivot is think about what are things that you could do that instead of just delivering to maybe twice as many people as you do now, or 10 times as many, do an exercise and think, if I wanted to serve 100 times as many people as I'm serving now, or 1,000 or 1,000,000 times as many, that's something that's going to help you start thinking about what you can do within your business in order to actually figure out what's scalable. And to be clear, you want to look at online tools. You want to look at things. There's Kajabi, there's Teachable, there's all these different tools. Samcart is a great way to sell those, where you can create things that your business, your audience could then sign up, watch a video, get a product, and 5 people could buy that in a day. 5 million people could buy that in a day, because it's not on your servers, it's not on your time. So that's a lot at once.
All right.
So,
Thank you, Leo. Yeah, are there more questions? It looks like Walter posted what next week is about.
perfect.
Yeah, just real quick, James is not with us at the moment, but he's a federal tax guy, a specialist. He's going to speak to the circumstances of COVID-19 and the relief beyond that $1,200, and how businesses can benefit from some of the federal monies and the pitfalls and tax consequences of that. So I think that's really on point for our present circumstances, and he'll be available. I suspect Ron Moss will be a stone's step away as well for that presentation next week. So there's nobody on this call that doesn't have tax consequences in these times. So I think it'll be a great presentation.
I agree. All right, Walt, Al, I don't see any more hands raised or any more questions here that we missed.
Well, thank you, Leo. Appreciate it. And how can, go ahead, Maya, you want to sum it up with the admin?
Yeah, just a reminder. So everyone who attended will receive the certificate of attendance for MCLE credit, and also an evaluation form to fill out with our Google form.
All right, thanks, Maya.
And the slides, we can send the slides out to everybody. I think that was mentioned.
Yes, the written materials also.
Great job, Leo, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I love this group. I love this topic. It's been a treat. All right, everybody, we won't keep you any longer. I'm glad we could take the time, and I'll let you guys
All right,
close
we'll
out.
see you guys next week. See ya.